I think there's two people at both spectrums. There's those people that think it's going to take over the world, take over their job, and they're afraid to even start messing around with it and play with it. And then there's the people on the complete opposite end that's like, this can do everything for me. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to modify it. And they're just really those early adopters. But what you found as an early adopter is that it can only do so much still. We're learning, we're programming it. I mean, it's human created, although it can crunch data quicker than any human could possibly do. It's still only as good as the input that's supplied to it. I mean, if you think of like LLMs, and those are the most popular things right now, these large language learning models, all they do is predict the next word that would typically be used in a sentence. So, I mean, that's something that you've been seeing before, AI became the buzzword in like Google, search response. It pops up and it's like, hey, they're probably going to search for this. And, use a tool like Grammarly, right? It goes in there and looks and said, okay, you should probably put a comma here or a semicolon. You misspelled this. So it's just basic functions of how we use our language. So I think from that use case, it is used. I mean, it's beneficial, but you shouldn't be afraid of it because still, if you use Midjourney or Dolly, you'll see when it comes up with an image, the text is all over the place and it misspells things that are very, very basic. Now that should be fixed soon. And that's like a minor example, but it's still learning. It's still early in the technology, even though it's been around. I mean, we've been trying to build this out for, 10, 15 years, if not longer. It's just been open source, I should say you could say, to the public in the past, 1 to 2 years.
Welcome to It's Marketing's Fault, the podcast where we discuss how to do marketing the right way. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford, and I'm excited today because I have with me Andrew Mounier. He is the head of growth marketing and user acquisition at Zimbly, the all-in-one AI automation assistant for high-performing teams. We're going to do a deep dive into AI, into marketing, and how those work together and whether we should be afraid, excited, whatever it is. So, Andrew, I am thrilled to have you here today. Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me here, Eric. I'm excited.
Hey, my pleasure. Now, before we jump in, what is something popular opinion holds about AI and marketing that you disagree with?
So that's a great question. I'd say the biggest thing out there right now is people feel like AI is going to take their jobs. You're going to be out of a job by tomorrow because AI is here and it can do all the things. I'd say I feel very counter to that. I don't feel like AI is in the position yet that it can truly like take over anybody's job. I think you need to look at it as, an apprentice or an assistant. And when you look at it that way, it's probably one of the best assistants out there because you can give it the input that you're looking for, and it can help give you that output that lets you dissect everything and really get to the crux of what you're working on. So I'd say if you look at it as a tool, an assistant, it's extremely useful. If you look at it as this is going to do all of my work, and it's just, you don't edit it, you don't really know what you're doing, you're just like, hey, do this for me with like very basic prompts and everything, then your performance is not going to be great. So you're probably going to get replaced anyways, unfortunately. So, use it as a great tool to help level yourself up and do better at your job.
No, and I agree with that because it seems like, just it's a technology. As you said, it's a tool.
Right.
It's to help the process of building stuff. As you are, as you're interacting with people and do you feel like that's part of an educational process for you as well, to let them know, hey, this is not the end of the world. This is just another tool, just like Word and Excel and other things to make your life better?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two people at both spectrums. There's those people that think it's going to take over the world, take over their job, and they're afraid to even start messing around with it and play with it. And then there's the people on the complete opposite end that's like, this can do everything for me. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to modify it. And they're just really those early adopters. But what you found as an early adopter is that it can only do so much still. We're learning, we're programming it. I mean, it's human created, although it can crunch data quicker than any human could possibly do. It's still only as good as the input that's supplied to it. I mean, if you think of like LLMs, and those are the most popular things right now, these large language learning models, all they do is predict the next word that would typically be used in a sentence. So, I mean, that's something that you've been seeing before, AI became the buzzword in like Google, search response. It pops up and it's like, hey, they're probably going to search for this. And use a tool like Grammarly, right? It goes in there and looks and said, okay, you should probably put a comma here or a semicolon. You misspelled this. So it's just basic functions of how we use our language. So I think from that use case, it is used. I mean, it's beneficial, but you shouldn't be afraid of it, because still, if you use Midjourney or Dolly, you'll see when it comes up with an image, the text is all over the place and it misspells things that are very, very basic. Now that should be fixed soon, and that's like a minor example, but it's still learning and it's still early in the technology, even though it's been around. I mean, we've been trying to build this out for 10, 15 years, if not longer. It's just been open source, I should say you could say, to the public in the past 1 to 2 years.
Hey there, if you're anything like me, you have lots of traffic coming to your site, but you have no idea which ones are window shoppers and which are ready to seal the deal, then I've got a game changer for you, Lead Feeder. This is a tool I like using that shows you which companies are coming to your site. You can track their behavior and integrate it with your CRM, which helps make your lead generation efforts more targeted. Result? Convert more website traffic into sales. Head to leadfeeder.com for a free demo and get a free extended premium trial when you let the rep know that you found out about Lead Feeder through the It's Marketing's Fault podcast. All right, back to the show. Yeah, and I appreciate that sort of that distinction, because it can feel overwhelming. Like since I think ChatGPT 3 came out like November 2022, like
right.
That seems to be the only thing on people's minds and people's conversations. And it's like like every business now has AI, like it has AI in on their webpage and whatever it is. And it seems like a lot of them are just trying to hit the trend as opposed to leveraging it well.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So we're always looking for the next buzzword, right? And the next trend. So, when Web3 started coming out, that's going to take over the internet. Everybody is going to be on Web3, and it has its own space, but Web3 has so many nuances and so many different, aspects to it that you can't just bucket it in. And it's really, really interesting. But then that's kind of like phased down. We had Internet of Things, a few years back, and that's still there, but you don't hear about it as much. It's like, oh, that's just necessary. It's just like built in there as a core aspect. And I say that's what's happening with AI. We're moving for most early adopters. We've already moved past the like mass excitement. There's still some like legacy, people falling in and saying, oh, this is interesting, let me learn about it. But most early adopters can't raise funds, if you think of it from like a Series A, Series B, aspect anymore, just on it being a series like an AI tool. It has to have some differentiation in it, and it has to have uniqueness that is solving a real pain point, which just takes you back to like the core of what products should do. They should be solving a pain point and not just on the next trend.
Yeah, it's I like how you describe that. It's past that sort of the initial buzz. Now we just feel, I don't want to say inundated, but you definitely feel like it is everywhere in many cases. Some of it does really well, some of it not so much, and it just depends on the use and the place and everything with that.
For sure.
And that kind of leads me into a question about Zimbly. So tell us about Zimbly. I watched the video on the website. I thought, oh my word, that's awesome. That looks wonderful from a project and an admin standpoint. So would love for you to share about Zimbly.
Yeah, absolutely. So Zimbly was founded by the former CEO and co-founder of Marchex. And so Marchex is a conversational AI that has been around. I think he found Pete, who's our CEO. He founded it maybe 15 years ago or so. So before, again, like I said, AI was a buzzword. It was already being built in, and he had experience on that. And he led that company to IPO. After it IPO'd, he was looking, talking to other people, and ended up figuring out that there's this pain point that they keep seeing inside of large enterprise organizations, and that's you're doing routine and mundane tasks that you probably shouldn't be doing. How do you focus on the meaningful things and use technology in a way that it really is helping us focus on the higher strategic level aspects of things that humans should be doing, as opposed to just busy work, right? So he built out Zimbly, brought together a really, really strong team. And what you could think of Zimbly as is, I guess the buzzword, the term that we use is enterprise productivity platform. And what that means is we're just a holistic suite. You have point solutions out there that do pieces of what we do, but not all together. So I think a good example is whenever you send out like a scheduling or a calendar link, that's one aspect. But how do you have somebody schedule a meeting with 7 people through your calendar link? You can't. It's really, really difficult. And that's also a very time consuming aspect of life, right? Somebody sitting there saying, hey, let's meet at this time, or what's your schedule look like? Let's just set up a meeting here, see who can make it. Oh, they need to readjust it back and forth. And that's a lot of time that's being used in inefficient ways to just get somebody to jump on a call to finally do the thing that you need to do, So we handled that aspect, and then you jump onto the actual meetings, and a lot of people meet remote nowadays, or that they don't have one individual or something in office. So we do the recordings of the meetings inside there, but we call our AI Xena, and so Xena is basically an executive assistant or a chief of staff, if you want to think about it that way. And so what it does is it helps you handle that scheduling part, which is the first aspect. Then it'll jump on the call and, of course, take notes. But it's not just another skin of ChatGPT. It's not just a language learning model. What it does is that it actually has multi-party understanding and conversation, which is really unique. When you think about it, if you're putting in a prompt in ChatGPT, since that's the most popular, it's one-to-one conversation. And the vast majority of things, again, even though it says it's trying to understand beyond more than one person, it's not. This is actually, Xena's actually sitting there listening to all the different speakers, figuring out what the consensus is from that conversation, and then aggregating that and saying, okay, these are the action items at the end of it, and then puts that on a to-do list for you afterwards so that you have your productivity checklist at the end. And then since we work primarily with enterprise customers, that of course integrates into whatever tool you have. So if you use a project management tool like Asana, it sends those notes in there so you have your Kanban board and task list and stuff. Or if you're a salesperson, it auto integrates into Salesforce and HubSpot. So it just pushes all those notes in there so that the people can, the marketing team and the sales team can see how that actually worked. Because, I've been there many times where I'm pinging the sales team. What were the notes? What happened in the conversation? Was it closed one? Was it whatnot? And they just hate putting in notes. So this auto puts it in there. So it handles that whole spectrum. And what we found is that actually saves people on average, from a study that we did, about 8 hours a week. People in an organization are spending 8 hours a week scheduling meetings, taking notes inside of meetings, organizing their to-do list, which is insane. And so when you multiply that out on a yearly basis, that's 400 hours that you're saving an org and a person to focus on more meaningful things. And then, of course, since we work in enterprise, that exponentially compounds because you have 50, 100, 200 people doing this. And so that's why we exist and why we built it.
Wow. That's fascinating. And like, I have worked in large enterprise level organizations, and
Right.
yeah, they're just like, I remember we had acquired a company and they were not part of our Google Calendar.
Mm.
And so like, I could not send meeting invites. I couldn't like,
Right.
you're just blind.
Yeah.
In that respect. And you're sending emails back and forth, or you schedule something and you hope it works.
Yeah.
But you just don't know. So this idea of being able to bridge that is amazing.
Yeah. It's made my personal productivity a lot better. And I'm not just selling it, but I actually use it on a daily basis. I send Xena a message and say, hey, I need to meet with these people. Can you get that handled? And it goes out there and gets everything organized and handles the back and forth for me. But I don't have to worry about it. It'll just pop on my calendar when I'm ready. And it's like, okay, great.
That's huge because like I've done that, right? I'm sitting there, okay, I've got to meet with these 4 people and I'm pulling up my calendar. I'm like, okay, let's see. I add them.
Right.
Oh, all I see are I've got this multicolor spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm like, okay, next week, ooh, maybe this one, ooh, and
Right.
it's a pain. It is
Yeah.
such
Yeah.
a pain. So, and one of the things I like about it too is, you mentioned this idea. It's very much a virtual assistant.
Yeah.
And you've heard now for forever this idea of play to your strengths and delegate that non-essential work. But the problem becomes like, who do you delegate it to?
Right. Right. Exactly.
And it sounds like that's what you guys are able to do with Zenblade.
Exactly. So we initially came out and said we were like the chief of staff. And the thing in the market is executives understand a chief of staff, but nobody besides an executive has ever had a chief of staff and have no idea what they really do. So we switched some of the language to executive assistant. And so you could say we've democratized the ability for everyone within an enterprise org to have an executive assistant and really get the benefits from it.
No, that makes sense, and that's definitely, and that's a great example of really shifting the positioning, shifting how it's being presented.
Right.
Because yeah, I agree. It's like chief of staff. It's like that's like usually way above my pay grade.
Yeah.
but like I get an executive assistant or I get a virtual assistant. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Like they're just going to handle all the stuff that I dread.
Exactly.
So let me just kind of build on that, because as this really kind of gets into a question on building a creative or building. Let me try again. This really kind of lends itself to this idea of creating a compelling narrative for your brand.
Yeah.
Would you like to go into that, and like how does that lead to growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of organizations go out there and they just want to be, I mean, we've always told them you have to have a differentiator, right? You have to have some sort of value prop. You have to like go through the exercise and figure out, who are you solving for? Why are you solving it? Why do you even exist? And I have to say, in the 15 years of experience I've had, there's not many brands that actually do that well. You go out there and you end up just being kind of like the same, just maybe a little better widget. This feature does this a little bit better than this other, company's feature. But nobody really cares about features that much anymore. They expect, I think a good example is I worked with April Dunford years ago at Agorapulse. We were going through like our differentiation and value prop and everything like that exercise. And Agorapulse is a social media management platform. And basically she told us, it's expected that you do all the things of a social media management platform. Like you just have to do all the things. That's not a differentiator. So to even be in the game, you have to have all that. What is it that separates you? And that took us a lot of thinking and going through it, some exercises to like write out, okay, we do this different. We do this. Ooh, we have this ROI, aspect of it that actually attributes things like organic social to revenue. Hey, that's a differentiator. Let's go ahead and push that forward. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. I have my master's in background in behavioral economics, so it kind of merges the understanding of human psychology with the numbers. That's why I was in growth, and so I go back to like the fundamentals of storytelling and narrative and how you create a human like emotion and connection out there. So there's the basic I guess archetypes that you can think of, like Carl Jung, built out the 12 different archetypes that are out there. But even if you take that back further, Joseph Campbell came up with like the hero's journey and everything around mythology. Who was it? I think it was Phil Agnew on the Nudge, his podcast. He recently gave a phenomenal example that kind of connects all of this into how you build a really good story. And so George Lucas created Star Wars. And what you could say with him is he created the safest story ever that was like already going to be an instant hit, because what he did is he took the hero's journey, which everybody already knows, and you can instantly connect with, oh, he's going through these ups and these downs, and these are the challenges. That's your hero in there. And then what he did is he created a newness factor and put this hero's journey that everybody knows and can connect with into space. Oh, that's new. So you kind of blended something people can already like recognize and they feel an association with something, hey, this has that newness factor in there. So I believe George Lucas created a really innovative movie before that was just out of this world. I forgot what it was called, but it was just all these different like nuances and really, really pushing the edges of like filmmaking, and it completely flopped. Nobody understood it because they couldn't make that human connection to it. And so what he did with this one is he went to that story that people can associate with and feel that familiarity, but then added like that newness. So I'd say that from a branding standpoint and building out your narrative, what is the archetype of your business, of your brand? Who are you? Are you the hero? Are you, whatever? What is that story? Who is the enemy, inside of there? Another good example is like Drift. Drift did this with forms in the B2B space, right? They made any kind of pop-up forms the enemy. You should not use a pop-up form. It's the worst thing out there. Nobody should do that at all, because they use the conversational model in there. And so their entire branding and marketing was they are the hero, and forms and pop-ups and lead capture like that are the enemy. And so that's what they did. So you can take that and figure out for your own brand. And sometimes it takes some hard, some late nights drinking a lot of coffee to figure that out. But if you can do that and then test it in the wild and see what resonates, that's whenever you really have a winner and you can differentiate yourself.
So what keeps businesses from doing this? Because you mentioned at the beginning, or you mentioned it earlier, and it's absolutely true. Like a vast majority of businesses, they just have different colors. Yeah. Right. And a different logo. And honestly, you can't tell the difference on their website. And it's just, so if this is the solution, what keeps them from basically doing it?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things there. One is they don't always recognize that they need to do that. Whenever you have, and I think Dave Gerhardt said this best when he's like, when the CEO doesn't get marketing, what are you gonna do there? You can't. They're the end all be all decision maker at the end of the day. You can push back only so far, but when they just don't get it, you can't do anything. So first, you need to make sure that there's that buy-in. That, hey, we need to go through this exercise. We need to figure out what our differentiator is, and then this is how we can work on our positioning. And then you need to also be realistic that this isn't an overnight success, especially if you're a small organization. You don't have much market penetration. People don't know you. So you need to figure out those core metrics inside of your organization that you could connect to this shift to help justify to the board or the CEO that this is actually working, but this is also a long-term, effort. And these are how we're trying to validate those things. And then it's also hard if you don't have the right person in the organization that knows how to do this, or even if they don't know how, they're not spending the time and the brain power behind putting this together and learning from people that have done it before, then it's just not going to be successful. So there were a couple things there, right? You have to have that buy-in from the CEO. You have to have a person who knows how to do this. And you also have to get, everybody together and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And it's going to take some time, but these are the metrics that we're kind of going to follow to make sure that this is a valid experiment at the end of the day.
No, and I like how you're breaking it down that way. And one thing with the metrics, I'm curious because especially on a startup, when you say it's going to take a while, and the startup's like, that's great, but we have 2 months worth of cash, and and you say it's going to take 18 months. Like, what's a good metric or one or two metrics that you can use to say, okay, we are getting traction, to be able to point and say we're doing the right thing?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So with coming up with a great narrative, the point of that isn't to, build this massive brand and say, hey, this is our amazing story of why we exist. I mean, that's a great benefit. And it's really cool to have this interesting, story arc and all this, behind it. But being from growth and also working in a lot of, startups that have that problem of runway, it's like, hey, we need to have return pretty quickly. The major benefit here is figuring out that your messaging is resonating and how it's resonating. So you need to run those experiments and put together, like any good marketer should do, is put together a brief at the beginning of any of these experiments, right? So this is your hypothesis. This is your null hypothesis. These are the different steps that you're going to take to test this. Easy way, put $10 a day into LinkedIn, Facebook, Google search, whatever platform that you think your audience is in, Reddit, maybe, if you're going after early adopters, and test out your messaging, put it in there and see what is leading to people wanting to click on it. So that's like a first step. But then is that messaging aligned with the landing page that you're taking them to? So they're like, oh, okay, they don't have any sort of cognitive dissonance that this is the message they get there and that's completely different. Just best practices. And then they give you, their email and you follow that throughout the whole funnel. So you could map this out and say, okay, we're going to run this experiment with this language, with this language, with that language. We're going to try these different channels here. And this is our hypothesis on like the return of that. So maybe it's, enterprise qualified leads, that are signing up here. Maybe it's trialers. Maybe it's demos booked, whatever that core metric is that marketing's, is supposed to own. Figure that out and then align it with your message tests. And then once you find something that's working, tweak it a little bit more, double down and see if you change this or this. Did that change what's the delta between the two until you get to something? And it's going to be constant refinement over time, but you should get some early traction based off of just running some of these tests.
And I love that. That makes sense. It's manageable. It's quick response. It's quick information. Sorry, I've got like several questions now.
No worries.
How does something like content creation play into this? Because as you're telling your story, as you're developing this narrative, as you're trying to figure out your positioning, does content come after this? Does content come before this? Does content occur at the same time? Where do you see that playing into it?
Yeah. Again, great question. So you need to figure out what you're trying to say in the first place before you create content. If you haven't spent the time to understand, okay, this is like I said earlier, this is our story, this is the narrative, this is the pain point that we're trying to solve for, and this is kind of the solution, then the content that you make is just going to be content for content's sake, and you're just sending it out there. So it's not going to have that alignment with the larger efforts. So I'd say start first with what are you trying to solve for and for who, and then build out the message tests. And then based off of those message tests, then you'd build out the content that kind of supports that. But if you don't have a huge content team, if you don't have a lot of time there, focus on those quick wins. So that could be a small experiment where it's just the message that you're trying to test out with a landing page. And then that landing page copy, align it there and say, okay, is this working? Is this not? And if it does, then you can build out supplemental content pieces around there. Maybe it's a white paper, maybe it's an ebook, maybe it's additional like supporting blog articles and stuff like that makes sense. You could also run, I'd say like a small ad inside of like a newsletter that's aligned with the community that you're trying to go after, because that gives you one, credibility if you don't have any credibility because you're jumping into somebody's newsletter that's already built that trust. But so that's one, like social proof if you don't have anything. And then two, you have the targeted audience that you're looking for, and you usually get responses within 48 hours. Once that email goes out, you should have everybody who's going to click on it done within 48 hours and to your site. So that's a quick experiment that you could run as well. And again, same thing, your message to your landing page, and is that converting or not? I'd say that's the key of it, right? And then the content comes after that to support those efforts.
That makes sense, because then the content builds off of messaging that works
exactly
to an audience that works, and so then it just you can leverage it that way. That makes total sense. So I want to talk. You mentioned this idea of the enemy and the hero, and trying to find that enemy or that monster that your brand is fighting.
Right.
I think it's incredibly powerful.
Hmm.
Do you think companies are afraid of doing that, or do you think they just want to try and please everybody? I'm
Hmm.
curious what your thoughts are.
I mean that's a hard, question. I'd say every organization has a different level of risk that they're comfortable with. But when you think about it, if your anti-hero or your enemy isn't, you know, it isn't like another org or something like that, and you're not going head to head against like this big monster, even though there's some that do it, right? Like, so DuckDuckGo goes, the search engine goes against Google saying, hey, they take all of your information. We're keeping everything private for you. And so that's a really strong stance to say, hey, we're going against the big corp and we're, this small organization keeping you safe, all this stuff. So that's really interesting. And that instantly creates an alignment with people who don't like their data being, stolen or like used in different manners that they don't approve. So that's interesting. I'd say if you've created a product, there had to have been some sort of enemy in the first place, right? There had to be something that you're trying to stop people from doing, or they're not doing properly, or so you could figure out who that enemy is and still build a narrative in there if you take the time to create that hero anti-hero thing. That was not the most eloquent, but
No. Well, and that was sort of off the cuff as well, because that was not, for everybody listening, that was not on our question list. But I've always wrestled with that, because as I've worked with companies over the years, there tends to be, especially large companies, especially enterprise companies, where it's like,
yeah.
We want to be, well, even small companies and startups,
Mm.
the idea of we want to be everything to everybody. And of course you can't. And,
Right.
we don't want to, granted our customer base is like this, but really we want all the customers, right? And it's like, no, you can't really do that. And so I'm always fascinated to hear other people and kind of their thoughts on how you set that up, or how you sort of identify who that
Yeah.
enemy is.
I think you made a great point there. So enterprise companies, those that have made it, are the incumbents, right? So their go-to-market strategy has shifted from being extremely aggressive with growth to more of, we do want some growth, but we're mostly just trying to, safeguard what we already have, because they've already made it. While if you have a startup, they don't have anything to safeguard. They're new in the space. They have nothing to lose. So it's like, hey, let's go at it hard. Let's make this huge company, our enemy, because nobody's heard about us, but they've heard about them. So let's piggyback off of that. And that's a smart move. So I'd say it depends on the stage of organization that you're working with, and also their level of risk inside it.
I like that level of risk, because when you do that, you are going something beyond plain vanilla, so to speak, right? You're putting yourself out there, and it could be to your benefit. There is that risk.
Right.
There's a lot of internal conversations, especially the moment you get shareholders and everything else. Then it's like, oh, we don't want to do anything that may upset people.
Decision by committee has killed so many companies,
It has, and with it, especially in marketing, it's just painful. It's painful when you can't, when you try to educate, when you try to help people see, and they're like, nah.
Yeah. I think one of the most important things that a marketer could do is internal marketing. And that's something that I didn't do for a long time inside of the orgs that I was in, because my thought was, I've been hired to bring in new customers. I've been hired to focus on them and draw them into the organization, and look at my metrics. They're doing great. They're coming in, they're converting, we're following all the way through revenue. Things are great. But no other department really knew what we were doing except for the marketing team. So even if the numbers are looking great, everything's working out internally, at the end of the day, some of the other departments are like, is the marketing team over there just like coloring? Like what are they doing? So I've recently, well, I'd say recently, in the past probably 5 years, every organization that I join, I send out a weekly email to all of the leadership so that they can know these are it's a short email. It's these are the wins, these are our major items for this week, these are our blockers, these are things that we're working on next week. Do you have any questions? And I have that North Star metric at the very top saying, hey, this is what we're doing and this is the success there. So I send that to the leadership team and then to all these other different departments in a separate email so that they can see, and my team as well, so they can see this is what we're doing. And that has helped a lot because you have to internally market, even though you don't sometimes as a marketer feel like you should. It's like, hey, we're on the same team, but you have to. It's so, so important.
I like that. And then, so I love this description of, to executives, to other, other groups and team leads. Is there like, and this may be getting too far in the weeds, or maybe getting into the secret sauce, like the secret Coca-Cola formula, so that we can't discuss. Like, it sounds like you're not trying to overwhelm them with information. It sounds like you're trying to give them 2 or 3 touch points in terms of key metrics, 2 or 3. Here's what we're working on. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. I anticipate that the leadership team will spend 3 to 5 minutes reading this. And so that's in my mind. They want bullet points. They want to skim through it. They want to see, okay, is there anything relevant to me that I should, interject in? Do I have any questions on these things? What are the major launches coming up? I don't want to overwhelm them, like you said. I've done that because I like to be, when I was younger, I like to give so much information that everybody understands the whole context. But they don't care, they don't really care about all that. I do, but they don't. So it's like, okay, I need to step back. The CEO has so many different things going on. He doesn't want to know how I set up this entire ad campaign, how I put this together. They don't care. They want to know what are the big bullet points. So I always start at the very, very beginning with just the North Star metric. That's if they read nothing else, I want them to know what is the most important thing to our department and what are we being held accountable for and how are we pacing on that goal. So it's a quick, this is what we drove this week. This is where we're pacing for our quarterly goal. And here's a screenshot. We use HubSpot. So here's a screenshot of HubSpot showing how things are looking. Boom. And then after that, if they want to continue, these are the major items from this week. So that's about 3 bullet points of core items. And then underneath there, some quick wins, challenges, stuff like that. But it's really, really a quick read.
No, that makes sense. So you basically have your key metric, that North Star, as you described it, which I think is wonderful. Your quarterly, your OKR, whatever your goal is, it's not 15 of them. It's like, what is the one thing we have to get right? And then you're able to show weekly growth on it. Because that's something else, especially, well, I think all companies, but, enterprise companies everywhere else, it's like they try to measure too much almost.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't really measure against 10 things.
Yeah.
I just can't do it. Like, give me the one that you need, and then that's what we'll target.
100%.
Yeah, so it sounds like then you've gotten pretty good response, or at least people are aware now of what you're doing.
Exactly. Whenever I jump on an interdepartmental meeting, usually the head of that department or even some of the team members, they know what's happening. So when we jump on there, I don't have to go over all of the different items again. They have a basic understanding, and then they can use that time more efficiently in diving into questions about that specific thing if they had any. But they also have direct access, to me anytime. Instead of like sending a Slack message, just asking about something, they can just respond to that email to me. I can, get back to them or dive into it, deeper later in the week. So it also creates, I think, a little bit more attention for the marketing team as a whole whenever you're doing that. And that's important to showcase your team and the great things that they've been doing.
I agree. And one of the reasons that I renamed this podcast "It's Marketing's Fault" is because I think every marketer, and I joke, but like, if you have been in marketing for any point in time at all, you excuse me, if you've been in marketing for any time at all, you have heard that phrase.
Oh yeah. Or
if not that exact phrase, you have definitely felt that sentiment. And so I appreciate how you're like, it's education. We're showing how we're meeting our goals. We're showing how we're moving in that way. You're taking the mystery out of it so that they think, oh, marketing is doing something, as opposed to coming to you and say, can you just make this look pretty? right?
Right.
It's which, is the other thing, which could have been another total podcast name, because for marketing, because that is pretty common. Let me just jump in real
Yep.
quick to because as part of Zimbly, you're doing the AI Unboxed podcast.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that podcast. Well, let's start there, and then I've got more
Sure.
questions. So
Yeah. So a quick summary of that is you can think of AI Unboxed is powered by Zimbly. It's really focused on AI in the modern workplace. I mean, that which perfectly aligns with what we do, right? I mean, our product is trying to reduce the mundane tasks inside of enterprise organizations. And so what I do is I talk to different executives, whether they're in marketing, the CEO. I had the CTO of Pocus on the other day. And so what we do is we just try to understand how are they incorporating AI into their product and how is that impacting the greater market, specifically from their product. But then we take a step back as well and look at things from more of a holistic standpoint, because privacy is such a huge issue with ethical considerations. So just getting these leaders insight on these different areas has been phenomenal. I mean, it's helped me a lot just stay on target with everything going on.
no, it does, because you're having conversations with people who are making major decisions on a daily, weekly basis for their companies and how they're going to incorporate it, and they're juggling all of the constraints that come for their customers. So
Right.
that makes sense. Are you seeing? I guess one question would be, does your podcast help with lead generation, with content creation? I'd love to see what's kind of that goal for your podcast.
Yeah. And I love this question because podcast usage and the building of one should have an intent behind why it's being built, right? For us, we know that we're going after enterprise customers, and that's all we work with. We only work with enterprise organizations. So our AI Unboxed gives me an opportunity and the organization an opportunity to talk to these decision makers that are typically at these enterprise companies, right? And so it's more of building a one-to-one relationship and starting conversation and having an additional touch point. That is, I'd say, one of the primary factors there is just, hey, we're Zimbly. I know you're from this massive organization. We love the insights that you have. Can you share with our audience? And so we give their organization some additional promotion inside of our ecosystem, and ideally they share a little bit on their side, but that's not the main lever for us. It's really building a relationship, because with enterprise sales it takes a while. You're looking at going through all of infosec, going through contracting, going through security protocols. So this just creates more of a human connection. That's the main thing, and so that has been helpful for us. The second thing, of course, is content. We repurpose this on LinkedIn, inside of our blog post, in our weekly email newsletter, all these different distribution channels.
No, I appreciate that. And I like how like you're not, the goal. I appreciate you bringing that up and starting the podcast. And it really, especially with what you're doing, reaching out to enterprise level executives who may potentially be customers. They, in the future, they may not be, but that's not the selling point, but it's building that relationship, because like you say, everybody is, I mean, if all companies look alike, so to speak, how do you know who do you want to work with? And well, if you add that human factor in, it makes a pretty big difference, I would think.
Absolutely.
And especially too, as you're working through the purchasing quagmire of trying to get anything sold, and that, like, having a champion like in there, like if you have a great conversation with somebody who's a CTO or the CFO or any of those, it's like, oh, I know them. I had a great conversation with them. Yeah, I like them. Let's do it. They're much more apt to say yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because sometimes we forget that, right? It's a non-sales conversation that can
Yeah.
lead to great things.
I mean, I think that phrase people buy from people they like is still true, even in the larger, B2B, SaaS ecosystem where people just self-serve and go through there. I mean, we don't really push the self-serve model. We work on the enterprise model, but especially with that, you still have to have that human connection, and they want to know who's behind the organization. That's why from a marketing standpoint, we create narratives so that people can associate and feel some sort of connection with us and our organization, and know that every org out there is just a bunch of humans. We're just a bunch of people building something and trying to help other people. I mean, that's it. At the end of the day, we complicate it and put all these different terms and things around it, but at the end of the day, it's just business. It's people working with other people.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we way overcomplicate things. So I appreciate you just saying, hey, it's just a human interaction. It's just interactions between human beings who happen to work for different places. So as we're wrapping up, one takeaway that you would like to leave our audience with could be about, just about marketing. It could be about content. I'll just kind of open the floor to you on that respect.
Yeah. So I'd say that the first thing is don't be afraid to experiment. I know there's still some people that are afraid to jump into AI, to mess around with it. If you don't spend the time just learning it, unfortunately, you're gonna fall behind. It's not going to take over your job. It's not going to take over the world. It's just a new tool in your arsenal as a marketer. So make sure you're going out there and you're checking it out. You don't have to spend all your time going down black holes and everything like that. Just spend a little bit of time there. And then I'd say that the second one is make sure that you're advocating for you and your team internally. We spend so much time trying to understand our target market, the ICP, building out messaging and running experiments like we were talking about earlier. But you also have to understand the internal dynamics of your organization and how you should communicate with them and how to market to them. Use social proof. Use the organizations that you just closed to show that you are doing what you've been brought on here to do, and how it's not just for the marketing team, but it's expanding the larger organization and helping them. So internal marketing is so important, and I highly advocate for people to go out there and do it.
I love that, and I appreciate that as somebody who's in organizations, been in organizations. I want to ask one question on just kind of on that. I know it was the last thing, but I've got one more. We'll definitely hit the time limit.
No worries.
But there is sometimes this internal meaning, like internal inside a person, like me or other people. This idea of, for lack of a better term, feeling like bragging, this self-promotion, like, oh, we're accomplishing X, Y, Z. And that doesn't happen with everybody. It happens with some people. So how do you, is there a way to get past that? Have you seen that? I'd love, would you just address that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say I'm in a good position where I'm a team lead, right? So I run a department, and as a good leader, you should never be going out there and saying, "Hey, I've done all these things. This is about me." So I'm in a good spot where I'm able to adhere to like that true servant leadership mentality, and that it's my team. I'm going out there and I'm advocating on behalf of my team and all the amazing things that they've done. So I feel like I'd be doing them a disservice if I'm not showing off all these things that I'm so proud of. Like, they are executing, they're going out there and doing amazing things. So for me, it's not hard for me to brag on them and let the whole world know. I even have a special shout out section where I'll call a person out by name. Usually it's team this, team that, this is what we're doing, which is very helpful. But when somebody goes above and beyond, which they do, I'd say way too many times for me. So it's like, I need a bigger brag section. But I like to call them out in front of everybody, in front of the executives, just to say, hey, they did this. They're doing phenomenal work. So for me, that's not hard. I'd say if you're an individual contributor, if you can get buy-in from maybe, your supervisor, your department lead, work up to them. Maybe you're not sending out the email to, the entire organization, but maybe you're just sending it to your supervisor and maybe your peers. And so with that, go over what you've been doing because you're contributing to an organization. So what have you done to contribute to the organization? How are you making it better? So putting a quick bullet points around your core OKR and the results that are aligned with that. Again, yes, you're doing it as an individual, but it's helping the organization. So how are you pacing? And I know myself as a lead, I'd love to get that, weekly from one of my reporters is like, this is amazing. And I'd probably take that and share it, out externally.
I love that. And those are great examples. Like if you're leading a team, it's the team. So you definitely champion them. But as individual contributors, I know that can be a funky thing. But I like how you say, hey, just share it with your manager and then let it, you can work from there. So I think that gives everybody some good things to work with. So Andrew, this has been a blast. I've learned a ton. So for everybody who wants to know more about you, more about Zimbly, where would you like him to go?
I'm only on LinkedIn besides my podcast and my newsletter. So please just find me, Andrew Mounier. You'll find me on LinkedIn, and that's primarily where you can connect with me.
Excellent. So we will drop that information in the show notes. Definitely check out Andrew on LinkedIn. Check out Zimbly. Definitely find the podcast, because if you're listening to this, you are a podcast listener. So definitely check that out. Andrew, thanks so much. This has been a delightful conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, Eric.